So each lung, there are two lungs which are separated, each have their own pleural cavities, and the base, the inferior portion of each lung rests on the superior surface of the diaphragm. Remember that diaphragm is that tough inelastic muscle layer which separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. And each lung is divided into lobes. So the lung shape, the right lung is wider and is displaced upwards by the liver. The left lung is longer and is displaced towards the left by the heart, forming what is called the cardiac notch. So here we have the lateral surfaces of the lungs. You can see here we've got the right lung, so that has 3 lobes, the superior, the middle and the inferior lobe, which is divided by what are called fissures, which are deep furrows within it. And you can see on the left side you've got 2 lobes, the superior and the inferior lobe, but you've also got this sort of cutaway edge on the superior lobe, which is the cardiac notch, and this accommodates the pericardial cavity, which is where the heart is located. Now we're looking at the medial surfaces, and you can see here that we've got the airway moving through and you've also got the pulmonary arteries and the pulmonary veins. Now remember that the pulmonary arteries are carrying deoxygenated blood because they're coming from the heart, and the pulmonary veins are carrying oxygenated blood because this blood has been down to the alveoli and has had its carbon dioxide dropped off, and new rich oxygen is now filled with all of that hemoglobin, and the pulmonary veins are carrying oxygenated blood back to the heart, back to the left atrium, down to the left ventricle, and then when the heart contracts in systole, that blood goes up through the aortic valve, through the aortic arch, and down through the aorta off to the rest of the systemic circulation. So at the bronchi, we've got the bronchial tree, and they call it a tree when you look at it, and it's got extrapulmonary bronchi and intrapulmonary bronchi. So the primary bronchus then forms the secondary bronchus, then the secondary bronchus forms the tertiary bronchus, and then you've got the segmental bronchus, and they provide down to the bronchopulmonary segment. So we're moving down smaller and smaller and deeper into the actual lungs. So the bronchopulmonary segment, each lung has a number of segments. The right lung has 10, and the left, again, remember it's a little bit smaller, has 8 or 9. The walls of the primary, secondary and tertiary bronchi, and they contain progressively less and less cartilage and more smooth muscle. Remember, the cartilage holds the diameter of the bronchial open, so if you're getting less and less cartilage and more smooth muscle, then what can happen is that you can get constriction of the airways, and this is what happens when a person has bronchial constriction associated with something like asthma. So the increase in small muscle tension affects the airway constriction and resistance. So as the tension increases, so the muscles tighten, the airway gets smaller, and you need an increase in resistance occurs. You need more pressure to push the air down, and you also need pressure to be able to get the air out, which is one of the main problems in asthma. So bronchitis is inflammation of the bronchial walls, and it causes constriction and difficulty in breathing. So the bronchioles, each tertiary bronchus branches into multiple bronchioles, and these bronchioles branch into what are called terminal bronchioles. So one tertiary bronchus forms about 6,500 terminal bronchioles. The bronchioles have no cartilage. They're dominated by smooth muscle, which means they have a high risk of bronchial constriction. They're under the control of the autonomic nervous system, which regulates smooth muscle, and it controls the diameter of the bronchioles and controls airflow and resistance in the lungs. So bronchodilation, where you get dilation of the bronchioles, is caused by the sympathetic autonomic nervous system. So if we think about the autonomic nervous system, there are two parts to it. One is the sympathetic part of it, and the other is the parasympathetic. Now, the way that I remember the sympathetic is if something goes out in sympathy, then they are working with you. So if you think of a lion racing towards you, then the sympathetic nervous system is what that becomes activated. So your heart pumps faster, you breathe faster, your eyes dilate. If you were digesting a meal, that digestion ceases and blood is diverted from your gut to your skeletal muscles so you can run as fast as you can to get away from the lion or the tiger that's coming towards you. That's the way I remember it. And then if we look at bronchoconstriction, bronchoconstriction is caused by the parasympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. Now, parasympathetic, I remember P in music means soft. So it means soft and quiet, and it's when you are in resting and reposing. So however, at this time when bronchoconstriction is occurring, histamine release is also occurring. And this is what can happen when you have allergic reactions. So asthma is when you get excessive stimulation and bronchoconstriction. And it can stimulate and it severely restricts airflow. So those bronchioles become tightened, airway resistance is increased, and the person has to work a lot harder to move air in and out of their lungs to breathe, which is why the person who's had a severe exacerbation of their asthma can become really, really exhausted. And we have to watch their level of exhaustion in emergency to make sure that the work of breathing is not exhausting them too much. If it does look like they're becoming too tired and too exhausted, then we may step in and provide assisted ventilation, where we anaesthetize the patient, put a tube down into their lungs and breathe for them so that they don't have to actively breathe. So we put them to sleep and put a tube down into their lungs to take over that work of breathing. This patient is now quite critically ill and would need to go to intensive care for one-to-one. One registered nurse is monitoring that patient for their entire shift. So it's a one-to-one ratio, one registered nurse for one patient. And that registered nurse looks after the patient for the whole 8 hours. So here we are looking at the airways again. You can see that the diagram is showing you we're moving from the trachea down the left primary bronchus, moving down to the secondary bronchus, the tertiary bronchus, down to the bronchioles, to the terminal bronchioles, the respiratory bronchioles, ending up in the alveolar pulmonary lobule. So that's what's called the bronchopulmonary segment. So we're going to look more at that now. So here is a large, very colourful diagram, but what we're looking at is one single pulmonary lobule, part of the bronchopulmonary segment. You can see that it's cut away, and what looks like a bunch of grapes with tight elastic bands around it are the actual elastic fibres around the alveoli. And you can see when it's cut away in that sort of purpley area, that's the inside surface. So that's where the air, when we breathe in, that's where it comes down and that's where it ends up. And that's where respiration can occur and the actual gas exchange can occur. Over to the right of the diagram, you can see the branch of the pulmonary vein. Remember, that vein is taking blood back to the heart. Remember, veins always carry blood back to the heart, and it is taking oxygenated blood back to the heart to be pumped by the left side of the heart out to the circulation. So the alveolar ducts and the alveoli. So the respiratory bronchioles are connected to the alveoli along the alveolar ducts. The alveolar ducts end the alveolar sacs, and the common chambers are connected to many individual alveoli. And each alveolus has an extensive network of capillaries surrounded by elastic fibers. So if we have a look at that diagram again, you can see that, that each alveoli is one little ball-shaped structure. And each alveoli is covered with epithelium, consists of simple squamous epithelium, and then there is a thin, delicate, the pneumocyte 1 cells, and then they have these defense cells which are called dust cells or alveolar macrophages, and they provide, they will gobble up or they will use their amoeba-like function to surround any dust with more mucus and allow that to be moved up and coughed up if it needs to be, or to render it less harmful to the body. And then you have pneumocyte type 2 or septal cells that produce surfactant. Now, surfactant is really important in keeping the airways open by decreasing the surface area tension. So surfactant is an oily secretion. It contains phospholipids and proteins, and it coats the alveolar surfaces and reduces the surface tension. So when premature babies are born, sometimes their lungs are not fully developed. One of the biggest breakthroughs that happened into assisting the survival of preterm infants was the manufacture of synthetic surfactant. So we now have the ability to squirt some of this solution down into these lungs to hold them open to help these little preterm babies to breathe. So here we've got another close-up of what we were talking about, the alveolar sac with the elastic fibers and the capillary network around each of those alveolars. So now we're looking at more even closer up view. So we're looking at well, here you've got a picture of 1, 2, 3, 4 large alveoli. You can see you've got the macrophages moving through and the different types of cells, the pneumocyte 1, the pneumocyte 2, and the endothelial cell of the capillary, and you can just see how close the surface of the alveoli is to the capillary surface. It's only 1 cell thick, and it's across that 1 cell where the carbon dioxide and the oxygen exchange occurs at the capillary bed. So now what we're looking at here, to give you an orientation, the top part of the picture with that sort of reddy orange bit is 1 red blood cell. The golden area is the plasma. The next red line is the capillary endothelium, or the wall of the capillary, and you've got the nucleus of the endothelial cell, and then you've got the fused basement membrane, and then the next bit, which is the purple bit, is the alveolar wall. Then you've got, moving down again a bit further, you've got that sort of blue line, which is the surfactant, which is that oily fluid which keeps the alveolar open. And then the white area at the bottom of the picture is the alveolar airspace. So air moves from the alveolar airspace through the surfactant, through the alveolar epithelium, through the fused basement membrane, through the capillary endothelium, through the plasma to the red blood cell. And likewise, carbon dioxide moves back the other way. So that's the end of this part of the lecture.